Then they dropped all of those books on the floor. Hi guys, it's Jess and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my July reading wrap up, and I had a really good reading month in July. I read 7 books in total and I enjoyed pretty much every book that I read bar maybe one. So let's just jump straight in. I'm afraid I've got a cold at the moment, so you're gonna have to bear with me if I sound a little bit hoarse or if this video is really choppy because I've had to stop to just cough my lungs up. But this is the only time that I've been able to film this video, so please just stick with me. The first book that I read was The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield, and I absolutely adored this book. This is just the perfect book for anyone who loves books. The basic premise is that there is a very famous author who has given various interviews throughout her career but has never been very straight with people about her life story, and then she discovers that she's dying and she asks a young woman to come and basically ghostwrite her real autobiography. And so this young woman, we follow the story from her point of view as she goes to where the author lives and sort of unravels this huge family mystery, and it's a very slow and quiet book, but it's just gripping enough that you keep on turning the pages and you keep on wanting to know what it is that lies at the heart of this story. So you kind of have flashbacks to the past as well as having the story told in the present day, and I just really enjoyed it. And there is a particular quote in here that I just absolutely love, and it just really struck me as so true for myself. And it says, "When I was a child, books were everything, and so there is in me always a nostalgic yearning for the lost pleasure of books. It is not a yearning that one ever expects to be fulfilled." And I just really love that. I just think that there is something about when you read as a child and how easily you can get lost in books and how magical books are that you somehow lose a little bit when you become an adult, and so you're always looking for that book that's going to take you right back to that same experience. But I don't think that that exists because of just reality, I suppose. But yeah, I just love this book. It was a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I adored it. The next book that I read was Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult, and as many of you know, this was a very highly anticipated read for me. The basic premise is that you have a nurse of colour called Ruth working in a midwifery unit in a hospital, and a neo-Nazi couple come in to have their baby, and they say that they don't want Ruth touching their baby. So a note is put on the baby's file saying no staff member of colour is to have anything to do with the baby, and then during a routine operation something goes wrong and Ruth has to get involved in the care of this baby, and the baby dies and the couple sue Ruth. So it is at its heart, this book is basically an exploration of all the ways, both big and small, that a person's race and the colour of their skin affects their everyday life. And it did everything that I would have expected a Jodi Picoult book to do, in that it challenged the way I thought about things, it challenged my perspective on things. I particularly enjoyed the author's note at the end where Jodi Picoult went into more detail about why, as a white woman, she decided to write a book about race, with the main protagonist being a woman of colour. I will say that the ending was probably a little bit twee and a little bit optimistic and kind of was a bit disjointed with the rest of the story, but I think in terms of going into this book expecting to be challenged and expecting it to be a relevant issue that raised lots of questions and made me question myself and my own opinions, then it definitely did that. And it is not without its problems, but I think that it was a very enjoyable read nonetheless. Then we have Everyone Brave is Forgiven by Chris Cleave, and this is a book set during the Second World War, and we follow a whole host of characters. It's a predominantly character-driven novel. It's very slow in the beginning, and although it does pick up later on, it is a pretty slow and quiet story. The thing I found about this book was that it was quite disjointed in places, but then equally in other places it was really beautifully written and really poignant. So although it wasn't a kind of blow your socks off read for me, I still did enjoy it. I did particularly enjoy the latter half of the book when one of the characters, Alistair, is based in Malta, because that is a part of the Second World War that I haven't come across much of before. So it was interesting to read his experiences, and it's also interesting to know that the author based a lot of the story on the experiences of his own family. So a lot of the information in here is taken from true events, although the actual story is fictionalized. One of the other things that I find quite difficult with this book is that all of the characters seem to have a very similar tone of voice and a very similar sense of humour, and so when they're all together it's quite difficult to distinguish which characters are which, and I thought that that probably is what let the book down the most for me, is that I expected the characters to have very distinctive voices and they didn't. But overall, I think that I gave this 3.5 stars. It was a very enjoyable read. It was slow, it was quiet, it was a little bit disjointed, which let the book down, but overall I thought that the premise was very interesting. It was interesting enough that it kept me wanting to read on. It kept me wanting to find out what happened. So yeah, it was a fairly decent read. Then I picked up Fool Me Once by Harlan Coben, and this was my first Harlan Coben book, and he is a writer of psychological thrillers. So the basic premise of this book is that you have a wife who was in the military and a husband who comes from an affluent family, and the husband is killed in a robbery gone wrong, and a few days after his funeral his wife is watching the nanny cam and she sees her husband in the footage, and she goes on basically like an uncovering of how her husband has been on this nanny cam, and is it her husband or is somebody messing with her. Since reading this, I have discovered from various Harlan Coben fans that this is probably his weakest book, and I'm pleased that I read those reviews because I was really disappointed in this. It was fast paced, it was quick, it was twisty, but the ending just absolutely let this book down so much. I will not go into too much detail because if you want to read it I don't want to spoil it, but basically I felt duped by the end. When I got to the ending and the big reveal happened, I felt nothing but duped that I had read this book and been taken on this journey, and then that was the ending that I got. And I think if you've read it you'll know exactly what I mean, but I just felt really duped. That's the only word that I have to describe it. So yeah, I'm not going to write Harlan Coben off. I've heard lots of people say that there are other books of his that are really good, and I thought that it was well written and fast paced. I flew through it, but I just would have expected more from the storyline. So if you've read any Harlan Coben books and you want to recommend one to me to try, then please do, because I am keen to give another one a go, but this one unfortunately was just not for me. Next up we have The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness, and this was my first Patrick Ness since I read A Monster Calls a few years ago, and I was really looking forward to it, and it did not disappoint. This is a YA book about the rest of society in a chosen one story, basically. So when a chosen one is going around blowing up schools and there are big flashes of light in the forest and all the various things that go on with a chosen one story, what is happening to the rest of the town or the city where they're based. And I thought that this was a really interesting premise. It was a really humorous and diverse read. It was a really easy and accessible read. I did think that I found it difficult to connect with the characters, but that often happens for me in a YA book, and I think that's probably just because I'm not a young adult, so their kind of angstiness just jars against me. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was really good for what it was. I thought it was an interesting premise. There were some laugh out loud moments. It did have its problems. I thought that it was a little twee in places, but overall I thought that this was a really quick, funny and interesting read. Then I read The Seven Sisters by Lucinda Riley, and this is the first book in quite an epic series of books that Lucinda Riley is writing. It's basically about a woman called Maya and her 5 sisters, and they've all been adopted from various places around the world by their father, who brings them to his home in Switzerland. And the start of this book, the father has died and all the sisters come together, and he has left them all a letter and a clue as to where they came from, and it's up to each sister whether they want to investigate exactly where they came from. The Seven Sisters is taken from the, I'm going to say this wrong but I'm going to try anyway, the Pleiades constellation. So each of the sisters is named after one of the parts of that star constellation, and this follows the story of Maya, who was the first and the oldest daughter and it follows her uncovering who she was. And so her story begins in Brazil, which was a really interesting and exotic location, and I really enjoyed that. Obviously the book is quite big, but I thought that it was really intriguing and interesting to read. I did struggle a little bit with the historical timeline in this book, and I thought that the character of Isabel was really hard to like and really difficult to connect with, and I thought that as an overall story arc it was quite predictable and quite stereotypical, so I didn't enjoy that as much as I enjoyed reading about Maya in the present day and when she was in Brazil uncovering her history. I thought that that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed that element of the story. I don't want to say it's coming of age because that kind of insinuates that it's a YA type book, but it's very much a journey of self-discovery for Maya. And I think that it's a really interesting book, and I have to say that I read it and I had enjoyed it overall, but I'd kind of thought, I don't know if I really want to invest in reading the whole series. I thought that even as a standalone book this was pretty good, but it hadn't gripped me. And then the very ending of the book had just this huge twist that straight away had me ordering the next book. So well done to Lucinda Riley for managing to completely hook me at the very last minute, because I'm actually really interested now to see where the story is going to go and what is going to be revealed further down the line. So yeah, I think it's probably a bit of an investment to pick up this series of books, but I thought that it was really interesting. You had a nice mix of present day and historical fiction, and yeah, an overall very enjoyable read. And then the final book that I read was When Dimple Met Rishi by Sanja Menon, and this is a book that has been very popular on BookTube just recently, and I think with very good reason. It's a YA contemporary romance book, which normally would indicate that I would want nothing to do with it. But I thought that I would give it a try as just a really quick and enjoyable read, and I am so glad that I did because I absolutely adored this story. It basically follows the story of two Indian American teenagers. You have Rishi, who is a young guy who wants to please his parents. He's very traditional in his beliefs and he just wants to do what his parents want him to do. And you have Dimple, who is a young woman who wants to do the opposite. Basically, she wants to break the mold. She wants to separate herself from her parents' expectations of her and just do her own thing. And they're thrown together by their parents in a summer camp, and they have to spend 6 weeks together, and that's all I'm going to tell you. Basically things unfold from there. This story did have the potential to be a little bit insta-lovey, but the overall thing that I thought was that it was just so sweet. The entire storyline was just really sweet. I really enjoyed reading about a culture that I'm not massively familiar with. I thought that the writing was just so easy and so accessible and so enjoyable, and I really can't wait to read more books from this author because I just absolutely loved this. I think that it ticked all of the boxes for what it wanted to do. Yes, the ending was probably a little bit predictable, but I just really enjoyed this book and I would highly recommend it. So there you go, they are the books that I read during the month of July. As I said, I really enjoyed most of the books that I read. Do let me know if you have any recommendations for a good Harlan Coben book because I don't want to write him off just yet. Please don't forget to give me the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content. I am going to be taking part in a video every day in August this month, and this will be my first video for that. So do make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss any of those videos. As always, let me know anything that you have been reading that you have particularly enjoyed, and I will see you all soon.